The Dark Knight Strikes Again is, I don't know how to describe it. You could not find two stories more dissimilar than Dark Knight Returns and Dark Knight Strikes Again, which is a problem since fans of Returns probably wanted more of what they liked in the sequel. But 15 years had passed. It's nearly impossible to get anything the same after that much time. Dark Knight Returns was mocking the Reagan administration, which was no longer relevant in the early 2000s. 9/11 happened while Miller was working on DK2, which informed the rest of his story. Frank Miller's artistic sensibilities changed. While he didn't do the pencils for Returns, I assume he was happy with the muted colors, the filthy, very real feeling and look and tone of the book. In DK2, it's a neon nightmare that doesn't look like it takes place in the same universe as Returns, let alone the same world. Returns feels like Dirty Harry. DK2 feels like Blade Runner 2049. These stories are like night and day, and some people like night, and some people like day. Dark Knight Returns is probably my favorite Batman story. Every time I return to it, I find something new to appreciate. Whereas DK2, I want to like it, but it's difficult. There are things in it I like, but they don't work, either in the context of this story or as a sequel to Returns. I know there are people who like DK2. If you're one of those people, you may not like this video. I can forgive the tonal shift when such a huge gap of time happened between stories. I can forgive Miller's artistic appetite going in different directions, even if Miller's art isn't my cup of tea here. I think his Daredevil pencils are much better than here. But an artist can't stay the same forever, so even if I don't like the idea or the execution of this book, I can forgive it. My problem is it doesn't feel like a Batman story. I did some math. Batman appears in 3 pages in issue 1. In issue 2, by the time you get to the 6-page lovemaking sequence between Wonder Woman and Superman, Batman's been in 4 pages. In total, issue 2 clocks in with 20 Bat pages. In issue 3, 17 pages, with an additional 4 pages of Batman letting Lex beat the stuffing out of him. Oh, you're so cool, Batman. If my math isn't wrong, that's 44 pages. 4 of those with Batman being beaten to a pulp. You want to watch the hero of your story sit around for 4 pages while his friends save the day, right? 44 pages out of 219. Batman is in roughly 1/5 of the story. If the guy's name is on the cover, you want him to be a central character, right? I counted a number of pages Superman is in. 21 pages in issue 1, 27 pages in issue 2, 18 pages in issue 3, 66 pages. Frank Miller says this is a Batman story, but the numbers don't lie. Superman is the character who goes through a change. I don't like the change. If you thought Miller mischaracterized Superman in Returns, oh boy, wait till you see him say it's fun to blow up airplanes with people inside. Remember, this issue was completed after 9/11. Superman's arc is going from, it's not okay to take over the world, to, yeah, it's fine. There's static characters who don't go through a change. Often, their refusal to change will change the world around them. Batman is a static character, as he influences Superman to make his arc. Sometimes, not saying this happened with DK2, but an auteur might forget to give their protagonist an arc. Then they'll hem and haw and say, that's a static character. I'm not sure if Miller deliberately sidelined Batman here, but I do think he was more interested in Superman than the title character. Batman convincing Superman to transform into a terrifying monster who's about to take over the world with an army of Kryptonians, that paints Batman as something of a villain, which I doubt was intentional on Miller's part, but whatever. If you ignore that this is supposed to be a Batman story, there's some pretty cool stuff here. The Atom in a petri dish fighting monsters, this would be great as the opening scene in a story where Ray Palmer's been kidnapped and has to survive in a hostile environment. But this isn't a Ray Palmer story. The Flash being used to power 1/3 of the country, that's cool. Too bad this isn't Old Man Barry. Lex Luthor, not a Batman villain, secretly running the world and blackmailing the superheroes who have to get off their duffs and take back the planet, pretty cool. Too bad this is supposed to be a Batman story. If you marketed this as a dystopian Justice League story and made people forget The Dark Knight Returns was a thing, this story still wouldn't be very good. I'm sorry folks, I have a theory the only reason you rated this so high is because Frank Miller's name is on the cover, and not because of any actual quality. A lot of the ideas work fine as old cranky JLA, but you read my mind, this is supposed to be a Batman story. Even if Miller was interested in a Batman-centric sequel to Returns, it would have been very difficult to make that work. Returns is about the realization that the world will not tolerate your presence anymore. When Batman is at his most constructive, uniting gangs and having them help victims of an EMP, the government tries to kill him. Not when Batman is breaking wrists and endangering children, when he is saving lives in a crisis. Batman has to change. Look at that, the main character of the story, who you know is the main character going through a change. Bruce allows Clark to kill him so he can go back to the shadows, continuing training his new army, but not to be Batman. Last page of Returns, it says Batman is a crime fighter whose time has passed. He's not going to bring back the old ways. At least, That's not how I interpret that. Batman went through a rebirth. When you do that, you do not go back to acting like you did before the rebirth. If he's not training these guys to dress up in costumes and punch bad guys, what's he training them to do? Good question. I want to say more of what they were doing after the EMP dropped, rebuilding in a time of destruction, but that might not fly as they would be noticed by the powers that be. That ambiguity is more powerful than any actual answers you could get, which is why it was such a puzzling decision to make a sequel to this comic. Not to mention, Superman and Batman have an understanding. Bruce stays dead, Superman won't come after him. It's a beautiful conclusion to their story. Return saw them thrust into a no-win situation, and they both made the best of their circumstances to save lives. Now they'll continue with that unspoken arrangement. DK2 repeats their conflict from Returns. Bruce, you made noise, now I'll have to fight you. It feels like Miller realizes he's getting repetitive, so he distracts you with nonsensical plot twists and new characters who have more narrative heft than Batman. I don't envy Miller. If you're doing a sequel to Returns, what do you do with Superman? Well, if Luthor and Brainiac hold Kandor hostage, Superman could do charades with Batman. 4 words, first word, sounds like model. This would have been easy when the world believed Batman was dead. He could help Supes free Kandor, then Supes could help Batman free the League. But if your defense for this story is we're having fun, we're not so grim anymore, then I guess characters using their brains isn't an option. We have to have big dumb fight scenes instead. Speaking of big dumb fight scenes, Dick Grayson. In Returns, Miller used Batman's ultimate foe as the penultimate threat of the story. The real story was what had been built up to all along in the news arguments about the relevance of Batman, about Batman learning to adapt when he was fighting the mutants and when he fought a more vicious Joker. Superman, Batman's BFF, represented the themes of whether Batman had a place in this dark tomorrow as the puppet of the government. DK2 tries to do something like that, but it doesn't work. Lex Luthor is presented as the main villain, but like in Returns, what you think is the main threat is only a secondary threat, with the main threat being Dick Grayson. In story, Lex is still the main threat, but it's only after Lex is defeated Batman has to face off against Dick. So emotionally, the story is putting this as the ultimate threat, higher than Luthor. With Returns, even if you didn't like the way Miller handled Superman, and I certainly didn't, it makes sense in the context of an older Batman fighting the power. It shows how far things have fallen. In DK2, Dick Grayson being the final threat doesn't carry that same weight. In fact, it makes no sense at all. On the subtextual level, I guess it makes sense. Frank Miller stated with Returns it was his mission to get Batman's genitalia back. I assume he hated Robin because he was representative of Batman losing that edge. So he throws Robin under the bus even though it doesn't serve the story. With Returns, I get what Miller is doing. With DK2, I see a grumpy old man talking about how a kid introduced before he was born ruined his hero. It'd be interesting if you kept everything in the first issue. Bruce and his army freed the imprisoned Justice Leaguers. They nearly kill Superman. In issue 2, Brainiac stages an invasion and gives Superman a choice. Fight me and the bottle city of Kandor is destroyed. Stand aside and the people of Earth die. This is directly caused by Batman inspiring the people to hero worship. Because of Batman, the villains take action and thousands of people die. You could say Batman didn't know about Kandor, but you could also say he knew if he resurfaced it would get messy, so he was acting in bad faith, even if he didn't know what Luthor had over Superman. The Justice League questioned their loyalty to Batman. Because of the Leaguers using kryptonite on Superman, he's weakened when Brainiac attacks. This might be better than sex with Wonder Woman restoring Superman's powers so that he's at full strength when Brainiac invades, but I don't know. Frank Miller would never deliberately portray Batman in a negative light. Not deliberately. Batman is rising up against a corrupt police state, but not to save lives. He blatantly says he doesn't care about an alien invasion where people will die. At the beginning, his regard for human life is still intact, but by the end, he's cheering when Hawkperson brutally murders Lex. Not sure when this change took place, but this is not the hero I fell in love with. A revolutionary who's only doing this because it's fun and doesn't care if Superman is contemplating world domination. This isn't one of the good guys. Lean into that. Have the League abandon Batman and his childish antics and let Bruce stew in what he's become. He was in a good place at the end of Returns where he could mold the youth of Gotham into a constructive force to save the world. But he missed the thrill of making a splash, and he endangered the planet. Bruce makes a heroic sacrifice to stop the threat. The League vows to not let things get this bad again. Miller would never allow Batman to be wrong, so this would not fly. But don't flirt with this if you're not willing to commit to it. I wouldn't go in this direction, as it would have too many of the problems I had with the DK2 we got. I wouldn't set the story 3 years later, but more like 40 or 50 years later. Bruce died shortly after the events of Returns. Even before his fight with Superman, we saw he had a weak heart. Taking a beating from Superman and swallowing a pill that temporarily stops your heart, that didn't do him any favors. It'd be poetic throughout all of Returns, Bruce kept commenting on how this would make a good death. death, training his army for their mission. He says this would make a good life. Then it's taken from him. Our protagonist would be Carrie Kelly, who, much as I love Returns, I never got much from Carrie as a character. She's there to say parodic, hip, cool teen slang. She never felt like a real character to me. This would be our chance to rectify that. Carrie tried to hold Bruce's army together, and for a while, she did, long enough to impress on them who and what Batman was. But soon, the army split into smaller factions, each with their own ideas about what Batman would do in this new world order. Much like what we saw in Returns, they appropriate the iconography of Batman without understanding his mission. We see a little bit of that in DK2, with some of them not getting the non-lethal thing. This would be kind of like the Grindel comics. Grindel started with Hunter Rose, novelist by day, crime lord by night. Then he dies, and the series transforms into an examination of what the identity of Grindel does to other people, to groups of people, and society as a whole. This wouldn't have to be exactly like Grindel. Most of the time, the Grindel personification had a negative influence on the central characters of each story. Carrie might live in a hellish landscape, but that's not because of her association with Batman. The misunderstanding of what Batman was can have a negative influence on society, but Carrie, one of the last people who knew Bruce, she won't spiral into insanity like she might in a Grindel comic. Shortly after Batman's death, Carrie's army sets up red solar generators all over the planet to ensure Superman would not get in their way when they're ready to get to work. Clark's on planet Xanthar drinking mojitos with Green Lantern. This is just to guarantee Superman won't get in the way of this story focusing on the legacy of the Bat ideology. But what Carrie didn't foresee was her army splitting up, and some of them returning to their militant ways. And with Superman gone, there's nobody to restore order, so things got even worse. The various Bat gangs divide the country into sectors. This would be just short of the lawlessness of Escape from New York. I don't have plot details on what this story would be. Does Carrie try to restore the image of the Bat with how much damage the Bat disciples did over the decades? Should she? Does she try to shut it down and let the Bat die? Or is it possible to shut Pandora's box? Would Miller be interested in an examination of how the Batman from Dark Knight Returns influenced pop culture? I won't lie, there's a lot of stuff in the aftermath of Returns I do like, but there are days when I wish Batman would go back to the less grim and gritty days. And unless I'm mistaken, it seems Miller wanted that too. He saw DK2 as a way to celebrate the absurdity of superheroes. You know, back when Batman had a zebra costume before Miller got his genitalia back. You might say what I've suggested wouldn't be conducive to taking the absurdity back into the streets where it belongs, but you could still do crazy stuff. Maybe one gang got a hold of Ray Palmer's tech and they shrink their enemies. One gang got the robot dinosaur running and it helps them keep order. One gang got a hold of some venom and after a few generations they're cartoonishly muscular. You could do absurd using the venue of the DC universe while keeping this in the realm of Batman. I know this is nothing like what the actual DK2 gave us, but having nothing in common with that book can only be a good thing. I hope you liked this one, and if you did, I do things like this kind of frequently, so check me out next week where I'll be doing a video on something else. Until then, have a good one.